Okay, continuing from chapter 5, this figure is a map of the world's primary productivity. As you can see near the equator, we get the most primary productivity. That's where there's the most moisture, the hottest. So here in these tropical rainforests, there's a lot of productivity. The places where there is the least amount of primary productivity is these in the purple, the open oceans. And that's because they're not getting a lot of upwelling from the coast, so they don't have as many nutrients. Also, deserts. Nutrients are often a limiting factor in ecosystem, and that's because producers need nutrients to grow. And if they don't have nutrients, they can't grow. Consumers can't eat them, so it really affects all the other trophic levels. So this may be a question that may be asked. What specific ecosystems, what are the limiting factors in specific ecosystems? So the oceans run out of nitrate, fresh water runs out of phosphate, and then land tends to run out of phosphate. So phosphate is not present in the atmosphere. It usually has to be eroded from sediments or decomposed. And so phosphate is a big limiting factor. If you look here on this figure, these are the dead zones that are found. So this is one of the world's largest dead zones is in the Gulf of Mexico, right near us, but there's others all along the world. And they're usually in developed or richer countries, and that's because they have more access to more fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer. So if you turn to page 115, only thing you have to know here is know that conservation biologists use something called GIS, which is kind of like GPS, but they can overlay different features of landscape to conserve and to restore areas. All right, ecosystem goods and services are important, and you're going to see this come up many times throughout the course. Usually they're just called ecosystem services, but they're services that the environment provides humans with economically or for survival. And these are not just, I've heard students say, like, an ecosystem service is a tree. That's not right because it has to be a process, and you also need to explain how that tree is providing us with the service that's going to help us make money or help us live. So some really important ones here. The wild produces fish, game, crops, nuts, and fruits that people eat. So that helps us survive, but also we can sell that to get money out of that. Supply lumber, same thing. That's economic usually. Regulate temperature, precipitation, regulating oxygen, carbon dioxide. Trees do that. Trees also prevent soil erosion, and they also filter waste, remove toxins, recover nutrients, and control pollution. So trees are awesome. They provide us with a lot of ecosystem services. So know some of these, very important. Read through all of them, but definitely memorize some. There's also some great examples in this picture, but if you're writing about it, you need to provide a little bit more detail. So instead of just saying purifying air, trees take in toxins from the environment and they purify them, or something with a little more description than these. All right, biogeochemical cycles. So these are our nutrient cycles like nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, water. So know all this vocab on this page. You have to know what a reservoir is. It's also called a pool. Flux, how quickly the materials move between reservoirs, sources and sinks, what those are. And our first nutrient cycle is the water cycle, but scientifically it's called the hydrologic cycle, and it is powered by the sun. So all that precipitation, the evaporation, all of that is driven by the sun. And the primary reservoir, the largest reservoir, are the oceans. We have the most water in the oceans. So know all of the water cycle vocab: evaporation, transpiration, precipitation, which we call rain precipitation, groundwater, aquifers, water tables, so know all of those. And then we always need to know our human impacts on these cycles. So the human impacts on the water cycle, we've built dams, aqueducts, changed the flow, the rate of flow of water, irrigation, and overpumping of groundwater. So know these impacts, read about them. And then the carbon cycle. So the water cycle is pretty easy. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we have the carbon cycle, and carbon is very important because it makes up, it's in all of our cells. It makes up all living tissues. It is everywhere. It's very, very, very important for us. The largest reservoir is sedimentary rock, and the second is oceans. It's also present in soil and vegetation. But we'll look at a picture in just a second. The oceans take in carbon. So the oceans take in carbon in a couple of different ways. They dissolve carbon dioxide straight from the atmosphere into water. Shells of animals in the ocean are made up of calcium carbonate, and that's also what corals are made up of. So in order to build those shells, they need to take in carbon to build and to form calcium carbonate and to build the shells. And then photosynthesis of phytoplankton or algae. So plankton and algae, they take in carbon dioxide, and they will respire, and then they will photosynthesize and release dissolved oxygen into the water. They're actually take in the most carbon dioxide. We call that carbon sequestration. They take in the most carbon dioxide that we release into the atmosphere. So they're very important. We're kind of overworking them right now. All right, so carbon cycle is right here. I have made my own little carbon cycle picture because this one is a little bit hard to follow. Mine is easier, I think, even though it doesn't seem like it right now. So let's look on the side. We have consumers and producers. Consumers will cellular respire, they'll release carbon dioxide. Producers will take that in, photosynthesize, create sugar, and then we will take in the oxygen. And we'll also consume producers as well, and also get carbon that way. But when we die, carbon, or when consumers die, and consumers are, it don't just include animals, but include like fungi, they include bacteria. But when they die, carbon is in the ground, in the soil, it decomposes, it reaches down further and further over time. Producers, when they die, same thing. Producers are burned sometimes. So usually it's trees. Consumers can be burned as well, but usually it's producers that are burned. Sometimes we'll take corn and we'll create ethanol, which is a fuel, and we'll burn that. People in developing countries will burn trees for energy use. Sometimes they'll burn it to help cook food. Sometimes they'll burn things like trash and paper as well, so that will also contribute to this atmospheric CO2. The carbon that's in the ground, it'll take millions of years, but eventually it'll make fossil fuels, and those will be burned and also put into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So very important, most important, how humans alter the carbon cycle. We mine and burn fossil fuels. We cut down trees. There's less carbon storage going on, and some of those trees will be burned, so that carbon also gets released back into the atmosphere. And we burn forests and other biomass. So biomass is any living tissue, so it could be charcoal, could be trees, could be paper sometimes is burned. It adds CO2, which causes global warming. All right, the nitrogen cycle. So this is the most complicated cycle, but we're going to go through it. So again, I have this written out for you, but this is the original picture. It has a lot going on. By the way, these arrows here, that's what flux is. It's the transfer of nitrogen or any nutrient from one reservoir to another, and the rate of that is flux. So again, oh yeah, and I would take a second, if you haven't, for the other picture as well, just pause the video so you can copy all of this down. So for nitrogen, nitrogen is very important because it is in our DNA as nitrogenous bases. Nitrogen is also in proteins. So nitrogen, again, very, very important. Atmosphere is the largest reservoir for N2. So about 78% of nitrogen of the atmosphere, of the gases that we breathe in, are nitrogen. But nitrogen gas is not usable. So organisms can't use that and then put that in their DNA. So what has to happen is in order for it to become usable form, it needs to be fixed. So it can either be fixed by lightning or by nitrogen fixing bacteria. And so they will fix it and they'll convert it to a usable form, which is either NH4 or it is nitrates. So ammonium or nitrates are the most usable forms of nitrogen. And so nitrogen fixing bacteria, what's really important about this is that these are present in the soil and they grow on legumes. So legumes are beans or soy or peanuts. They grow on the roots of legumes on these little things called nodules, root nodules. So if you plant a lot of bean crops, that's good because you may be getting more fertilizer, nitrogen into your fertilizer, into your soil. So there's so that can be made usable for them. Also, when organisms die, this dead things could be consumers, producers, any dead organisms that are dead. When they decompose, that's called ammonification. And so this is ammonia, but ammonia is toxic. So ammonia has to be converted by other nitrifying bacteria. And this is the process of nitrification for going from ammonia to nitrates. So they take this form from an ammonia to NO2 nitrites to nitrates, and then that can be taken up. And whenever nitrates or carbon or anything is taken up, it's called assimilation. So when flour is taken nitrate from the roots, they're assimilating. When we eat plants and get the nitrates that way, that's called assimilation. Okay, and then nitrates, there are other bacteria that actually fix this and denitrify it so that it can go back into the atmosphere as N2 gas. Okay, so you have to know this whole process, and it's also going to be on this next page, and I'll go through this in the next video.